All right. Wow, my throat. Theory and theology. What is up? Good morning. I don't usually record in the mornings here. 7:44 a.m. Thursday, February 15th. We are more than halfway through the second month of 2024. Hopefully, you guys are doing good, meeting all your goals. Um, I'm studying a lot of Hebrew this year. Um, people keep saying, I'm not studying like modern Hebrew. I'm studying like more ancient biblical Hebrew. I have somewhat of a background of studying it, somewhat. But let me just give like a bit of an outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm pretty tired. Um, this is kind of how I wake up some mornings. I kind of just start podcasting as I'm having some coffee and kind of get my thoughts rolling in a certain direction. And this morning, I'm kind of in the mood to talk about religion, spirituality. Like, usually I'm podcasting elsewhere, kind of talking about like work or um I don't know, like lifestyle stuff, but not anything that's really in the realm of like spirituality or like learning and like self-teaching and studying and stuff like that. So I kind of want to dive into those types of topics this morning. Kind of kind of in the realm of religion, but kind of also in the realm of like just thought processes around it, mine and some of others. I don't know why my sinuses and throat are so weird in the morning. Um, I woke up pretty early though, around like 5 something, like 5:30 maybe. Um, I did wake up a bit around 2 a.m., but otherwise I slept okay. I'd say I slept better than I slept the night before, so that was fine. And then, you know, like I was doing a lot of studying yesterday, kind of stayed in. Um, I'm not a big Valentine's person or whatever. Um, and then, just lately I've been enjoying just listening to other people's conversations when they're studying certain topics. And you know how they have certain channels on YouTube where they call in. So there's this one guy, I've talked about him a little bit before, Tanakh Talk. There's this other guy, Rabbi Tovia Singer. Um, I think I kind of watch a little bit of the MDY, his MDY Dafyomi, um, of like the Talmud discussion, um, for the daily daf, or the daily like 2 pages that is read of the Talmud. I don't do this every day. I'm not like every day like in this content. Um, it's just every now and then I'm like, there's certain people I kind of pop over and watch, and that's why I'm like, I want to talk about it. I'm not always watching their recent um episodes. I'm just kind of watching kind of like whatever it is that pops up. So I kind of want to talk about some of the stuff that I've come across. Um, it's gonna be a little random because it's not. This isn't one specific topic. I guess the topic is kind of what I've been coming across regarding like religion, spirituality, study of such things. There's a podcast called, I think it's called like Flat Earth or something like that. Um, Let me see what the actual name of it is. I've posted a link to it before. It's called the Flat Earth Files. I listened to that a little bit they talk a lot about NASA and like different kind of things to try to see like are these like conspiracies, and then they try to compare stuff to like the Bible, and there's always this questioning about like why are there so many Freemasons involved in the presidencies, and why is there so much occult symbolism, and you see it in with SpaceX with Elon Musk, unfortunately, and like all this kind of stuff where it's like people are like throwing up these symbols and stuff, and like you look sometimes into like the logos of things and you're like, why would they choose to use that strange occult symbol, or like different things like that. And just some conversations I've had with friends over the last few days, I kind of want to dive in all that stuff, and I'll see if there's anything that comes out of it that's worthy of like a full on topic and deep dive. So this is just brushing the surface of some of the stuff I've been coming across lately. Might be of interest to some people, might pique some interest to some people. I'm just trying to wake up, kind of reflect on some stuff that I've been coming across, and use my memory. I feel like I'm often relying on notes. Um, so I got to have a very valuable conversation with a friend the other day. I also got to have a very not so valuable conversation with a different friend the other a different day. But I mean, I would say I got irritated by it by the second conversation, but I had to kind of understand more about like why. I had to like search myself and be like, why am I so irritated with this? Um, I guess I'll just start with that one. The conversation I got irritated with was mostly because I feel like, you know, the person wants to talk while they're kind of like inebriated, and they kind of like bulldoze the conversation and they don't listen. And it's like, have you ever tried to get a word in with somebody and literally you have to like talk over them or be like, hey, listen, hey, stop, hey, listen, and they just can't stop talking? It was kind of like that. It was like they kind of wanted to try to like debate on stuff, but it wasn't very open minded because they weren't really in a space to listen. And I was just like, why did I even pick up the phone and get into this conversation? I should have. I mean, I'm over it now. I'm just explaining like the experience of it. It wasn't really worthwhile, for my energy. You know, I think everyone. I mean, I have my own faults. I'm not saying other people shouldn't have faults, but like some days I'm just not in the mood for it, and I've got like my own limited energy, and it's hard to like get my energy kind of like adjusted to a point where I'm like able to focus on what I'm trying to study or where what I'm trying to think about. And I don't like to get irritated with people and be filling my head with like all these thoughts about how irritated I am and how annoying that person was with the way they were like acting or like describing stuff. It's like it's just a waste of brain power that I could have been spending the hours I spent talking to this person. I could have spent them studying something else. But I was thinking, is there any value I could get from that? And I came to the conclusion of a lot of points for myself, a lot of um, topic or areas for myself where I was like, yeah, I've already noticed that there's certain times that aren't best to talk to certain people. Some people drink at night. I'm not judging on it. I mean, I'll drink if I feel like it, but it's not like a nightly habit of mine. But some people like to drink and call. That's fine. But is it quality conversation? With some people, I feel like it can be quality when people are kind of more open. It's like the alcohol maybe gets you a little bit able to talk about things that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily share, or be open to like talking about, it can kind of help your mind a little bit in that way. I don't think alcohol is maybe the best substance for that. More like maybe a shroom microdose or like a little bit of cannabis is probably more um it's probably going to appeal to your consciousness more, not so much the shutdown of different thing like but it kind of, alcohol does have a bit of an effect where like it kind of shuts off some of the inhibition, so it does kind of have some positive effect. Like I notice when, there's certain friends that like we're usually a peaceful group, we can have a drink together, go sit, grab sushi, ramen, whatever, have a nice time out, long conversations about deep topics over some sake or something. It kind of gets you kind of maybe a little more open minded to touching on some topics, maybe psychological topics or like. But I mean, I don't know. I would prefer other substances for that, but I could see how alcohol can have that effect with some people, especially if it's like a peaceful conversation. And it's probably more likely that people are going to have alcohol versus all these other types of things. Just if you think worldwide, you know, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I don't know if cannabis is more, or like CBD and all that, if it's going to be more available. But I mean, anyways, those types, there are different types of substances, and you might have more access to certain stuff that you wouldn't just in your day to day if you're sober. Sometimes your mind is kind of shut down, and you kind of like wouldn't be open to like talking to that person because your mind is like, oh, I don't know them, and there's so many reasons why, I'm not comfortable, and I'm just like shy or nervous, and like, I mean, I'm not saying people need to get like plastered and go just like talking to random people, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. I'm not even saying like getting like go get drunk and go like do a bunch of stuff just to meet people. Like, I'm just trying to say like sometimes if you are trying to have like an open-minded conversation, you can have it under the influence of some types of substances, a little bit of influence of it, a small dose of it. It doesn't have to be like a lot. Like even now, like I drank coffee this morning. I was super groggy. There's no way I would even be able to really articulate myself even this much if I hadn't had coffee. It's like, and coffee, yes, it's a substance. It's got caffeine in it. Um, there are all types of substances. Like I'm not even making a judgment on the substances. I'm just saying like they can have an advantage when you're trying to think either more quickly or like access information more quickly, or have your processing speeds a little bit faster, um, and kind of like expand a little bit on certain things. It can be beneficial. So I do understand that, and I'm not gonna like say that I devalue people having alcohol in their system or whatever, but just this, I'm talking about a specific situation where I'm like, you kind of have to learn people, and some people just aren't the best to talk to, especially about some things. Like when I've known someone a really long time, I don't really mind diving into like religion and politics and kind of like a little bit kind of taking like, let's see how we can, if we can talk about this. But I've kind of noticed with this person, we can't talk in the evenings or at night because they're pretty far gone, with the substances, to a point where it's like, what are we even doing here? Like, we're not even having like a conversation. It's like they might as well just be podcasting. They're talking to themselves. Like, it's not, we're not really having a conversation. There's no back and forth. It would be just like if I'm talking while you're listening to this and I'm talking, and if you had like a question and you're trying to say something, and I'm not going to hear you because I'm over here podcasting. I'm just going to record this and post it, right? But that's how that conversation felt. Like if you could imagine, if you're listening to me talking right now, and you're on the other end and you're like, oh, but I disagree because of this reason, or oh, but I want to talk about this, and you hear how I just keep on, keep on, keep on, and it's like I'm not even acknowledging that anybody else is even on the phone with me or whatever. Like this is a one-way conversation. Like literally, that's how it felt. Like I was literally on the phone like that, and I was just like, I should not have stayed. I should have just been like, it's late, I'm tired, I was kind of in the middle of something. So that's my fault. I stayed on the phone and entertained it. And like I said, some people I'm like, well, if I've known you for a long time, if you bring up like religion or politics, I'm not going to shut it down too much, or I'm not going to like just say um some kind of like thing to kind of like blow off the topic, because sometimes those those kind of conversations turn into arguments or debates, and it's like you can lose friendships. I don't think I've ever lost, maybe. I think I have a feeling that I maybe lost a friendship over one conversation, but I can't confirm that because we were still kind of in touch. But I feel like there was a point with one person that I knew for a little bit that we were hanging out for a long time, and then they brought up a topic about something about my own cultural background that they were kind of like, they weren't saying but say they were like, oh, you're black, so you're gonna go to hell because black people are evil. It was almost equivalent to something like that, and I was like, whoa, but he like, what is going on? And so of course, I get defensive, and I'm just kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, they were just like coming at me with some random prejudice thing, and I was just kind of like, I'm not gonna like just let people say like what they were saying was not accurate at all, but it was very prejudiced, and I was like, I kind of just mentioned like that's very prejudiced, they didn't want to hear it, they thought that because they were part of a majority culture they could say that. It wasn't a race thing necessarily, but it was something along those lines. Um, and excuse me for a second, I gotta go adjust my heater before I'm not. Open the window. Might be a little bit of sound of traffic here, but could have done this. All right, I'm settled. So sorry. I didn't expect that it was gonna get so hot in here, and I usually try to hydrate with my coffee. Usually try to hydrate with my coffee in the morning, so I went and got an extra water bottle out of my gym bag. Sorry about that. I'm not prepared. Um, but anyways, yeah, like I don't like arguing, it and debating and stuff. It stays in my mind. It's like, but sometimes I'm like, let me try to get value out of it once the emotions calm down. Let me see if there were, when I reflect on this, can I learn something about myself? Like I did learn, that I need to remember with certain people how their kind of patterns are, and that it's not of benefit to me or very good for me or helpful for my energy to engage with them at certain times. If we're going to talk, it needs to be, you know, when I'm not busy doing other stuff. Like I was kind of busy doing something else, and they wanted to talk, and it was fine, but I thought we were going to be talking about something else, but they couldn't really stay on topic. And I'm not just trying to like put somebody on blast. I'm just saying, like, for me, that was not valuable. That was not a valuable use of my time. Now, to give of my time to friends or family, I believe it gave me that opportunity to do that, and I think it's important. And lately I've been pretty isolated, just like working on my own stuff and studying my own stuff and kind of like ignoring everybody. Like, not, I'm not mad, I'm just kind of like, you know, like when you get in like final exam mode or like midterms mode, and you're just like, okay, like I'm not making as many plans with people for like this next week or two, and I'm not really, I'm just like buckling down and like studying and like just because I feel like it, like I don't have anything to do. Like, it's like reading like biblical and like other religious things and like listening to like different, speakers of different spiritual paths and stuff talking. That's not, gonna, it's not, there's not like a deadline on it, but usually it's like when I feel like doing it, like when I get like that energy or motivation to do it, that's when I try to jump into it because I feel like I learn a lot more. I'm more focused versus when there's other times where I'm like, I don't really feel like doing it and I probably still should study stuff, but I just don't. I'll be just like watching YouTube or just Instagram stuff or whatever, and it's not like useful. It's just for entertainment purposes only, and that's fine too. I'm not saying you have to be like studying stuff all day long and like just practicing some spiritual thing like all day long. Like, I mean, I know some people believe that that's the best way, and some people believe, like you got to balance stuff out and like work, play, go out, do stuff, and then come back and like. So it kind of depends, like what's best for you. I don't really know what path I would really say people should follow. I think it depends what's best for you. But that's kind of what's socially been going on. It wasn't like a big deal, but you know, some social situation where it was kind of just like, man, like I kind of wasted like almost 3 hours of a night, just interacting with someone who just, I don't even know if they're going to even remember what we were talking about. And I was like, okay, at least I let them kind of vent about some stuff and tried to like, you know, comment about some of the stuff that I felt like they're benefiting others, like where I see like, okay, you're really helping out a lot of other people. Like they seriously were on some of the things they were saying. And so I tried to acknowledge that. But pretty much the rest of the conversation was just, you know, they were talking about their political views and like, I don't know. They have a lot of trust in government and presidential leaders, and with the current and upcoming elections and everything, they're really swayed towards one end, where it's like, I take a stance that I think the majority of politicians are evil or want greedy, things that aren't really going to benefit most of us. I don't really think that, I mean, maybe some might be on a slightly better end than others, and depending what ethnicity or gender or sexuality or, where you live in the world or in this country, and what your economic situation is and your education level and your opportunities look like, you may benefit more from one than the other, but I don't think any of them are fully beneficial for everybody, and they all kind of suck. That's my opinion. I don't really play favorites. It's like I think most of them kind of suck. At least the ones that are going to get into office, usually they're not the best or the most ideal. But I don't really know. But I that's just my opinion, because I ask myself things like, okay, when I look at most people that I know, are people getting healthier? Maybe. I'd say, some blue zones, there's a little bit of blue zones, or maybe they just got recognized as blue zones. I'd say I've recognized a bit of health consciousness, like people thinking about it more. And I was able to recognize, like, you know, back when I was maybe like younger, that I didn't really see as much of people kind of like trying to focus on exercise and stuff. But I feel like people maybe were healthier like back in the 90s, maybe. I don't really know. Like I just feel like, obesity levels and just the food that people like, mainstream foods and mainstream media, it's not good for our physical health or mental health. A lot of it's just not healthy. Like the stuff that we're easily exposed to isn't really that healthy, and it's getting worse quality, and people are getting sicker and sicker. I feel that's what I kind of see around me, but it's everybody who's getting sicker and sicker, so it's not so noticeable. But if I compare like now to like the 90s, I'd say what has improved maybe is that people kind of know more about mental health a little bit. People kind of call out like abuse and other things like that. Like I do see things kind of like trying, like people are more aware of stuff, I feel like, but they're also busier and more swamped and bogged down by the day to day. And so it's like they don't really have time to rest or relax or recover or like reflect. So I don't know. I don't know. But I don't really see people's wallets getting better, their banks getting better, their education getting better, education becoming more valuable for more people, and being able to land good jobs and work their way up and like, retire when they're supposed to retire, or even feel like they're comfortable enough to even like save for retirement or invest or anything. Like I'm of the millennial generation. I just don't see it. I don't see it before my eyes. I don't see things improving. And so it's hard for me to say, okay, are these leaders of ours really doing a good job if, our country, the common man in our country, the common person, their life isn't getting better. I mean, I haven't seen people's lives, people saying like, "Oh yeah, my life is better." It's getting like we learn to adapt and deal with it and cope with it, but I don't think ultimately like things are like improving. I think it's getting scarier and worse and harder, but we're dealing with it, but I don't really think it's getting better or easier. It's just like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna just live through it and just do what you gotta do to make it work. But that's why I say, and I mean, I can't just blame politicians. I mean, we gotta take ownership for our own stuff too. But it's like, I do see a lot of things that aren't going well. And so when I think about, okay, who to vote for, who should people vote for, and you hear people say like, "Oh, I want Trump again," or "I want this or that," and I'm like, and so many people are like, "Well, Trump was better and Trump is good." It's like, I mean, we're still. I mean, is your life really that much better now, or is it, like, is it going to be better, in the future? I don't see it happening that way with any politicians. I don't think any of them are going to change the system enough so that people can move up, comfortably move up, be able to not have to be like on their last, you know, their last ounce of energy most of the time, barely being able to like pay for what they need and be able to also have fun and like have a balance of like fun, vacations, being able to learn, being able to recover and like study. And most people just work so hard that all they can do is veg out at the end of the day. That's the honest truth. And if they're not, it's hard for people to be productive and like build themselves up, exercise, eat healthy. A lot of it comes from like the high stress. That's what I see. Maybe I'm just looking at it through more of a psychological lens, but I mean that's kind of what I see. I don't see things getting easier or better for people. I see it getting worse. And so that's usually my political argument, is like I don't trust any of these politicians like until I see one that's actually going to make life better for the majority of people, or like for most people, and these evil systems getting changed so that different people aren't like downtrodden or their rights getting taken away or like being oppressed by the system and stuff. I haven't ever seen that. I haven't ever seen that recently in my lifetime. There's been a lot of oppression, a lot of, you know, just problems, and drama, and like people getting like legal charges and stuff. It's like, I don't know. It's just a dramatic stage, like I I really try to opt out of it as much as I can, but then it's like, well, what does that do, you know? Yeah, I feel like I'm here to kind of help people if they want to listen to something and then think about some topics later and have something on your mind that's like, let me just think into that, see what I think. You can agree, you can disagree. I'm here for that. You know, let me just throw some topics out to the wind and like see what people find appealing. And I'm not really even here to push my own stances. Um, but I do find it hard to talk to people that only want to push their own stances, and that made that conversation the other day pretty difficult for me because I was just like, why am I even talking to this person right now? Like, you know, and I don't mind talking to people who are drinking or on drugs or whatever. You know, I don't really mind. It's just, I feel like my time could have been spent better otherwise, but that was my fault. That was my fault for continuing into it as well. So, um, you know, that's why I'm like, I don't see the point of arguing politics, religion. Um, I don't really like people trying to like jump down my neck and tell me don't study other religions. Like that was kind of another thing that was coming up where someone was kind of saying like don't study other religions, and I'm just like, how can you? I don't know. I don't believe in like narrowing my mind. I like to talk to people. I like to interact with all kinds of different people. And if I stop studying religions and stop studying different cultures, like how would I even know how to relate? I'm not saying like, oh, I want to convert people or whatever. I'm just saying like a person's religion or their spiritual beliefs, is a very deep part of them, and it's a very authentic part of them. And if you can't even like have an open conversation ever about it, it's like it's going to be hard to kind of have a deep connection with someone. I mean, I'm not saying I need to have deep connections with every single person that I know or meet, but I think it's valuable. And I mean, I don't try to bring stuff up to argue, but I also don't really value just arguing in conversations because you know, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But I just don't like it. It's just not my thing. And I'm learning. I'm learning to kind of deal with this online culture of, the whole let's not meet in person, but let's talk over the phone, and let's not meet in person, but let's text each other, and let's not actually hang out, but let's Zoom, and like all it's like, but I feel like it puts up a bit of a wall. Like people can't really express themselves like they would in public. It's like, and in person, like I feel like it's a little difficult. Um, but I've had some good social interactions, some really good ones where, you know, we've gotten into talking about kind of like seeing how much occult type of symbolism is out there. I mean, if you look at Nickelodeon, if you look at NASA, if you look at a lot of these there's a lot of major companies and groups that have certain symbolism that it's like you would wonder like why would they choose that. Like I was joking with a friend and I was like, when somebody starts a business or a company, they have all these meetings. Like it's not just one person deciding, like they have all these meetings like, what's our mission statement and what's going to be our purpose, and what's going to be our logo, and like what does it stand for, and like somebody had a conversation with probably multiple people, and like what were they sitting there like, oh, we need these occult symbols, and like this means, like some kind of thing. And it's like, you know there's a lot of stuff that goes back to like the Roman Empire and all this other kind of stuff where you're just like, what is happening? Like, and you start seeing it everywhere, and you're like, I don't know. I was joking around, and I was like, I texted one of my friends during the Super Bowl, and I was like, haha, like you see the Roman numerals like on the Super Bowl field, and it's like, oh no, it's attached to like something about Rome, I'm like just kind of laughing about it because we're just like, it is almost like a holiday. It's like a non at least it seems like it's a non-religion based holiday. Um, and then somebody mentioned something about like Carnival and Saturnalia, and I was like, is that like the timing? Like, I mean, I'm not trying to say like the different cultures. Like, I'm not trying to say like if it's not a Bible based culture that it's not valid. I'm just saying like why? Like, I always have to ask myself like why would they use certain symbolism and like why would it be all these holidays are like connected. It's like, oh, there's this other holiday like right after this Super Bowl or like whatever, and you're just kind of like left thinking like, we're too busy to think about these things. Honestly, we're too busy. And there's some stuff that came up with that Super Bowl with it. I'm like, we never use Roman numerals for anything, right? Like I think most of us learned how to do those tick marks, that 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that fifth one across or whatever, and like I don't even know if that's even Roman numerals. I think it's called something else, but it's like you kind of learn like the one, the I and the V is 4, and then the V is 5, and X is 10 or whatever. And I think they teach that in school. I think I learned it in school. I don't know, but I was, you know, like when I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, like you kind of learn Roman numerals, but we don't really use them. Like I'd say the most that I've ever used them is if I made like an outline in like an English class or something, and sometimes instead of using bullet points, you use like Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. Like maybe, but that's like as much as I've ever used it. I don't know for other people if they've ever used it more for other reasons, but that's the most I've ever personally been involved with it. But I'm not saying like I'm against like the ancient Roman Empire or whatever, but they had a big role in modern day Christianity, and they had a big role in a lot of things in history that have to do with like that phase between like Judaism, Jesus being on earth, and then what is now modern Christianity. I mean, Rome kind of infiltrated a lot of the early Christianity phases, and so that is why my attention goes there, where I'm like, what were they doing, And if you know history of Judaism, you know about, you know, like Hanukkah, the festival of rededication of the temple after, the desecration of the temple, before the Maccabean revolt, um, you know, where, there was a point where a pig got sacrificed on the altar. I don't quote me. I don't know if that was the Roman Empire that was involved in that, or I'd have to reread the history of that. But I know the change of the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, into Sunday, because of the sun worship and, the god of, you know, it comes from the Roman Empire. Like it was changed, by Rome. And it's like there's all this stuff that's like Rome was like infiltrating, and I'm not even trying to make like I'm just trying to ask why. Like why were they so involved in changing all this stuff? And how does that affect us today? I mean, now it's just common culture. Like a lot of Christianity has a lot of common um situations that come up where it's just like it's just common now. Um we're not even um it's just common. Like right now with you know what people do, a lot of people don't know the history of Christianity, but the more you look into the history, you're like, it wasn't always as it is today. And just seeing how big of a hand Rome played in it is a little odd to me. Because if you look at Christianity and how it looked before Rome, kind of started having all those like councils and all this kind of stuff, it's like a lot of that stuff seems like it wasn't solidified. Like, especially all the divinity of Jesus, like, it seems like they're the ones who kind of made the argument for these things. And like I mentioned in another episode, like that the Bible, the New Testament of the Bible wasn't even written, you know, the earliest books weren't even written yet. Like if Galatians was the first book written around 45 to like 60 AD or CE, whichever system you use, um there was still like a good, you know, what like mm, maybe about 20, 15 to 30 years or so that um after Jesus, that there were no actual scriptures and people were still technically practicing as Jews, and then the scriptures start coming out. And if Paul is the first one writing them and he's connected with Rome, it's kind of like, what is going on? But I don't know. These are the kind of things I question. And I'm not questioning them to make other people stumble. Like, do I even know what I'm talking about? I mean, I'm looking at it from my own lens, from my own perspective, and just going down rabbit holes of what interests me. I mean, it keeps me studying because I'm like, well, this interests me. I want to know about the early, churches. And I got interested in that by watching um, that one guy, Matt, um, whose last name I always forget, but he goes and like talks about. I've put links to his videos recently too, and he goes and he talks to different people, um, different religious leaders, usually different Christian groups, like the Jesuits, Catholic priests, or like the Orthodox priests, and a lot of them talk about their history, but they talk about their history kind of like from the time that Rome was getting involved. Um, so I guess the main questions I was having were about like the icons, the iconography, the I guess comparison of like Judaism and how they are basically in search of the Messiah, and their focus is, on keeping the commandments and study and, the wait for the Messiah. And then you have Christianity on the other end that's like, no, Jesus is already the Messiah. And Jews are like, no, well, there's not peace, so he's not the Messiah. And Christians are like, well, he was the Messiah, and Jews are like, no, he's not the Messiah because he was not of the lineage of David on you know I guess there's a tribal lineage. Now Henry Abramson has a video that I wanted to see. I haven't watched it yet. It's about the history of when Judaism started using matrilineal um, genealogy to identify Judaism. Now, people say that like the messianic lineage has to come from the father's line, not the mother's line, and Jesus' father wasn't biologically Joseph, whose Jesus' father wasn't biologically Joseph. If they're saying he had a divine birth of God impregnating Mary and Mary having a virgin birth of Jesus. And I mean, the lineage matters. I mean, the lineage is gonna matter. But in Judaism, that's the part that I get a little confused on, where there's like, okay, they don't believe he's the Messiah because his father is God. But I'm like, well, Adam's father is God, and David traces his lineage up to Adam. And so, why can't Jesus trace his lineage to God through Adam? And I mean, why can't he trace his lineage to God? Um, but I don't know. I guess everyone can trace their lineage that way then, but I don't know. So I guess that's the argument, that you can't, according to to Jewish belief, from what I'm understanding, you can't take the mother's lineage of connection, and you can't take Joseph's lineage of connection, because Joseph isn't biologically the father. Or is Mary's lineage even coming from the line of David? I don't really know. I think the Bible talks in the New Testament about Joseph's lineage. I don't know about Mary's lineage. I think Mary's lineage, she would have to be Jewish for Jesus to be Jewish. Um, but I don't know. Uh, the lineage would have to be traced through David, and Jews don't believe that. And so, because it doesn't go through Joseph, but I feel like if it goes through God, doesn't isn't that a higher level than Joseph? But I don't really know. Maybe that's not counted. Um, I don't really know. I really don't know. I don't know if there's a way to really find an answer to that, but that's kind of like where the argument lies. And then with the councils that were trying to, uh, now I never read the actual, if there's even documents about it. I just read in general what were the main topics of these uh first 11 councils, and apparently there were more councils, but I only learned a little bit about the first 11 and these major topics about the divinity of Jesus. That doesn't seem to have been fully clear while Jesus was on earth. I feel like the questions did come up a lot. The Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, other rabbis, the disciples, the people. There was a lot of questioning about, okay, is Jesus divine? You know, he often referred to his father as God. He often referred to, um, you know, his himself as being one with God. He often referred to other passages in the Old Testament regarding prophecies. He did, as well as other writers, Paul, the writers of the Gospels. A lot of them kind of quoted from the Tanakh, from the Old Testament. But there's a question of some of the accuracy of some of the quotes. Um, like, was it accurate? Were they all accurate? I think Rabbi Tovia Singer, he's the one who kind of dives deeper into those, like showing some of the passages, like in Hebrews, where it's like there's some extra lines added that maybe weren't in the book that was being quoted. It doesn't say that in the Old Testament, but it says it as part of a quote in the New Testament. And there's things like that where you gotta kind of wonder why. It's like, well, why isn't it right? It's not the same thing. Like, and it's not even like slightly different wording. It's like there's completely a whole line in there that's not even in the Old Testament. It's like a complete different phrase. Um, and so I'm kind of sometimes studying that kind of stuff. Just like, are things pretty consistent if I look at it through a different lens, without the lens I was raised with, how consistent is it? And then if I look at Judaism, how consistent is Judaism? I guess where I mostly get hung up is on all the prophetic stuff, because to me, if somebody wasn't telling me, okay, this is a prophecy, like when I read the book of Isaiah, I don't even want to say it out loud, but it sounds like there's some kind of experience at the beginning that either mimics like a psychedelic experience or some kind of experience with some kind of alien thing, or it was an experience with angels. And I don't really know, like those three types of topics tend to come up often, of like, are these experiences where people are having all these kind of explanations of these visions, you know, because when people in modern days do different types of psychedelics, they have those experiences too sometimes, or when they're in different meditative states, they can get to like some type of uh trans like experience that's almost like it's like a trance type of experience is almost like uh like something with like DMT or some type of like psychedelic type of experience almost without actually taking anything. And people have mentioned that they can get to those states. And so I kind of wonder, when people say that they had a vision, what I'm already just like, I'm interested in it. I want to know more about that kind of stuff. But it's like, I know that's not like, most people might just read it and be like, oh, he saw like an angel and got this vision, and like, but I'm kind of like, you see these themes where you're like, okay, when people say they saw an angel, were they doing something to get there? Because people who do these Kabbalistic types of practices, you know, these mystical kind of meditative practices, kind of get to these different levels of like seeing types of angelic beings and visions and stuff like that too. And multiple cultures have methods in which they can get different types of visions without taking substances, and with some you take substances to get there. And I just wonder, I'm like, either they maybe were on something or weren't on something. um but other people can have these kind of visions too. I mean, I don't know about all the like prophecies about, oh, this king and that king and all, like all those kind of details, but I'm just talking about the very beginning, like, because that's kind of where my head gets stuck, where I'm like, okay, there's some kind of like experience happening here, and then it kind of goes off onto all these in like these prophecies about these kings and stuff. And then in Judaism, it's kind of interpreted as what the Messiah is gonna, um like the qualities of the Messiah or the background of the Messiah. And then there's also Maimonides, who was a much more recent writer, um, who people take a lot of what he says too. And he does use some of those passages, talk about those passages as well in a lot of the prophetic writings. And so I don't really know. Like I feel like the more I study, the more confusing it gets. And sometimes, like, I'm not really trying to like put words into it and like see into it what I want to see. I'm just kind of like, okay, well, what about this angle? What about that angle? I'm kind of just playing with ideas just because I have the time to do it and the energy to do it, and it's kind of what I want to do. Um, but I'm enjoying myself, just trying to study different stuff. and see what connects, what doesn't connect. Um, I mean, and with Rabbi Tovia Singer, I kind of see a little bit of um. Oh my goodness. Some of the thinking feels a little. Close this. A little unclear. Uh, um, as far as what he says about Christianity. Um, I mean, there was. I guess off of those topics, off of those weird topics that I kind of am just like always asking why. Outside of those strange topics, I've been kind of reading. Sometimes I read with the Parsha, sometimes I don't. I just go off tangent. I read a little bit of last week's. So after the situation with the Ten Commandments, comes up with all these other laws, and I'm kind of seeing them differently. Like when I used to get to those sections, I used to just be like, oh, like this is the most boring part of the whole Bible. Like the end of Exodus, all of Leviticus, you know, like let's get back to the cool stories, like what is this? Like all these like laws and things. Oh my goodness, guys. I accidentally bumped the receiver for this little Bluetooth mic and took like 10 minutes. I had to restart the app and took like 10 minutes for the upload to save. It was like 56 minutes of my rambling recording. Um, I thought I just lost it. But anyways, I think sometimes there gets to be a certain point where it's like comparing, you know, Jewish thoughts and theories to Christian thoughts and theories. It gets to a point sometimes where it's like, we're um, it seems like we're almost comparing apples to oranges. It's like, um, we're not comparing the same things. Like, I know in Judaism they don't really see Christianity like some Christians do. Christians see Christianity somewhat as an extension of Judaism. I would say I kind of see it that way, especially like the early church, like the early, phases of Jesus being on earth. Because I mean, the majority of those believers were um Jews still, and they were still allowed to worship in the synagogues. They hadn't really gotten excommunicated or anything. There's no like proof of that. Like if Jesus was allowed to speak in the synagogue at temple and he had a role there, he probably wasn't doing so much that was off, you know, of what was expected or, outside of the law. Like, yes, he was getting a little bit questioned about, like, are you within the law? Why are your disciples breaking the law? And, like, all these things about the law, the commandments. Are you keeping them? Are you doing it? And he even asked, the rich young ruler about the commandments. Are you keeping the commandments? He wasn't like, oh, like, come do this. Come, rich young ruler, and do this whole thing. It's like, stop thinking about the commandments and just come follow me and my followers and do all these things that have like nothing to do with like Judaism. Like he still seemed to be Jewish, interacting with Jews. His followers were Jewish. Some maybe weren't. I think maybe a small percentage weren't, from what I'm learning. it wasn't like 100% of them were Jewish. There were non-Jews, but it wasn't like now how there's like mostly non ethnically, genealogical Jewish people following. Like there was a following that was mostly Jewish, and I feel like if you haven't gotten kicked out of the synagogue, if you're still being called to the Torah to, recite and teach, then you're not outside of the law. Like I feel like the conversation in the New Testament where or the multiple conversations where it's like the leaders were like questioning Jesus or like trying to trap him and stuff. It just seems like as what I've studied of Jewish culture, that seems to be normal even nowadays. There's this spirit of like study and not necessarily argue and debate, but like challenge one another and talk about it, you know back yourself, prove. I'll give some examples, and these are just examples from random things. um a popular book, The Chosen by Chaim Potok. There's Daniel, who is the Rebbe's son and next in line to become the Rebbe. He's like some kind of genius with a photographic memory. Um, and he gets into this. That was a spoiler if you haven't seen it. You can watch the movie for free from like the 80s or like um read the book, but I'm about to do a little spoiler here. Um, so if you haven't read it or watched it, you might want to skip off a little bit from here. But basically, I'm not gonna spoil the whole thing. I'm just gonna talk about the parts about how they studied. So you see, after you know the Hasidic group that Danny's a part of, they play a baseball game against other Jewish boys that aren't ultra religious. It sounds like they're religious, but they're not like ultra religious because Reuben still studies the Torah and the Talmud, and it sounds like he still keeps the commandments, but he doesn't dress in the Hasidic garb. Um, it doesn't seem like him and his friends are always wearing like a yarmulke. Maybe they do. Um, when Ruben gets injured by the baseball that Danny hit into his eye, where glass from his glasses gets into his eye, and then Ruben's in the hospital. His father brings him his tefillin and reminds him, you have to pray every day, kind of thing. So he prays, um, and he has tefillin, meaning he's bar mitzvah. So, you know, but when Ruben starts becoming more friends with Danny, he starts hanging out more with his community, and he comes over for Sabbath and to worship with the Hasidic community. And there's a portion where the Rebbe, who's Daniel's father, starts talking, and he kind of says a story, and he asks, was my story good? Was it correct? And he does this. It seems like he does this routinely every week to kind of ask questions. Um, and then he usually does it to his son, Danny, and Danny is supposed to respond like about what part of the story wasn't accurate and back it up. Like, no, it was this rabbi who said that, or like the Talmud actually says this and not that. And so he first asks Reuben, is this correct or not? And then Reuben doesn't really understand. He's just kind of like, yeah, I liked your story, like it was good. And then Danny kind of makes this comment like, oh, this part was the mistake. And then he asks another question, um, and Danny answers the question correctly, and says this is the right answer. Um, Another example, I've watched um some live Jewish synagogue services, because during the pandemic there was a lot of live streaming. So I was like, let me just watch some services. I've been to maybe one service once ever in my life for a college school project. And so I went to a local synagogue over in like Manhattan Beach or something. And a kid was like having his bar mitzvah. He was at the Torah, like chanting what he needed to chant for that service and everything. And so he was there. He was, um, yeah. Well, anyways, I don't have anything more to say about the service that I went to in person. But um, the one that I was watching, online, people were allowed to kind of comment live. Like they're talking about the Torah portion from the week and the portion that they were discussing for the day, and people were able to kind of give their perspective on it, maybe back it up with something else or ask a question or something. And if someone else didn't agree with it, they can maybe comment, but it wasn't like a debate. It wasn't like arguments. But it sounds like, in Christian services, you don't usually have this kind of discussing where people are like discussing the actual text, like with the person. It's usually the person who's preaching is talking to you, and you're supposed to learn from what they say, but there's no discussion. So if you have a question or if you have a comment, you're usually not like interrupting the pastor and just being like, "Oh, well, it says this in that text, but you just said this," or like how do we compare what you're saying to like this other text over here, or what we actually practice with this tradition. Like there's none of that. It's just like the pastor's talking, you sit in the pews or in your seats or whatever, and you listen. Some Christian conversations, they might have little breakout groups where they're like, okay, talk to the people around you and like discuss this topic. But usually, even in those, it's pretty superficial. People aren't really like everyone getting to speak. It's like just a couple minutes of time where people can talk, and you don't really get to dive deep. You're not like studying the actual scripture. You're just like having a little comment when they're like, okay, what do you explain the time when you experienced the love of God or something? And then everyone kind of goes around with like 6 or 7 people giving like a little testimony or example. You're not like opening the Bible and being like, well, the Bible says this. And then like someone else is like, well, I know this text over here. So that's why I say it's almost like comparing apples to oranges sometimes. It's like the cultures aren't really the same. Christian culture is more, it's usually been from history, not even the whole society was like literate. Versus in Judaism, I mean, to become bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, you have to be literate. You have to be able to read and chant from the Torah, which is something that has set that group apart. Like, at least they knew how to read that language, and knew how to read. And so it's like, if you can study text on your own versus if you're forced to kind of like listen to somebody else interpreting, like a lot of early Christian tradition, once all the Gentiles started getting involved, and then if you think about the history of Rome and all that, and all the like serfdom and all those kind of times, like where not everybody was reading. There's like all these peasants and stuff, and they don't all know how to read. And then there's these religious leaders that are just saying all this stuff, people having to pay penance for their sins, and like the church kind of manipulating the money and being like, you need to pay to like be forgiven. And like there's all this like weird corruption that's like, I mean, I'm not saying that other religions don't have that too, but it's just like, it's weird. To say the least. It's weird, and it is part of Christian history. um but I do think, it is kind of normal, I think, what you see in the New Testament of how Jesus is getting questioned. Like, yeah, maybe their hearts were kind of like, we're trying to trap him, we're trying to catch him up in something so we can arrest him, maybe that was the focus of the jealousy and the egos, and like he's gaining all this popularity and getting all these disciples and stuff, and they didn't like that. But still, he wasn't breaking enough of the laws that he had to stay out of the synagogue. Like, I don't remember any time where him and his followers get kicked out of the synagogue. um I mean, later on in the church history, um the Christians kind of get kicked out, but early on Christians were worshiping with Jews. And so that kind of makes me think, there was an overlap early on in Christian history, um at least until the point in history where Judaism felt like, okay, this is no longer the same thing anymore, enough to the point where the Christians aren't doing the Jewish way. But it seems like up until that point, there were still the debates about it and arguments about it, but it wasn't like a break off religion. It seems like it was within the same religion, at least for some period of time. And what I kind of like to see or learn about is like what happened during that time when people were still worshiping in the synagogues. Like, what did they believe? Because it seems like there was nothing alerting people more than the usual kind of questioning and the usual kind of like people challenging each other. Like, even nowadays, when people study Talmud, they have a chavrusa. It's like this type of a study partner, for lack of a better explanation, where you meet and there's two of you studying the Talmud together, or more people studying the Talmud together. And, you know, there can be like debates or discussions, you know, and people study hard. They study on their own, they study with others, they learn these commandments, they learn the explanations of the commandments, the commentary around the commandments. There's a lot of learning, and it's normal to talk about, okay, this is what I believe, this is my debate, this is my explanation. And people might argue, feelings might get hurt. You see, if you watch the stuff online, you see it all the time. I talked about a video with Rabbi David Vigler, where he's literally teaching about the Messiah, and you can hear people in the background kind of like debating him. Now it's not always, like I'm saying, it's not always like an off the charts like debate where people are like hurting each other's feelings and like, I'm leaving this temple and never coming back again because somebody was rude to me. But it's a normal part of the culture, it seems, from what I'm observing. I'm not even Jewish, but from what I observe, it's normal for people to challenge each other on religious things. Um, and so I wouldn't take the challenging that I see in the New Testament to necessarily mean that, Jesus and his followers were doing wrong. I just think those religious leaders and religious Jews in general commonly challenge one another on what they're doing, why they're doing it. Not everyone's going to come to the same conclusion. As I'm learning with humans, that's why they always say, like, don't talk about politics and religion, because no one's ever going to have, like, maybe, me and some of my friends or family might have the same opinions, but we're not always going to have the same opinions on things. And, at the end of the day, it's like, for me, I got to just be like, okay, like, you can think what you want if that's what works for you. I mean, that's the conclusion you've come to, and I will think what I want. We don't need to discuss it to death. We don't need to try to convince one another to change each other's mind or convert somebody to some other religion. If you see things the way you see it, that's how you see it, and that's fine. I mean, I think people should be able to be fine with it. Um, it's hard. It's not easy. Just like I was explaining with my social experiences, it's not easy. Rabbi Tovia Singer has another video out about, how Judaism views Satan versus how Christianity views Satan. I find that to be interesting. I want to watch that. I haven't seen it yet. And just in general, like I said, with the commandments and stuff, I've been kind of reading a little bit of Exodus. Um, I'm I think I stopped at the part where they're talking about the ox. The ox is if an ox is like goring someone, but has the history of goring people, and like I think I was getting it past that, like to the laws of restitution, and like if one ox gores somebody else's ox, like in what case, you know, does the owner either is the owner either responsible or not responsible, like those types of things. But then the Talmud, what they're studying at MDY is I think it's called Bava Kama, something like that. I don't really know what it means, but it's called like Bava Kama, and it's studying some other. I think the last one I looked at, I'm like a couple days behind. A couple days, as in not caught up by a couple days. Last night I listened to the one that was from the day before, so I didn't listen to yesterday's, and I haven't listened to today's. But I also haven't listened to like months and months before that, you know? So it's like I'm not like caught up. I'm just like I dip in and then I'm like it's very time consuming, so it's hard for me to really just listen to like all this stuff every day. I don't really have it built into my schedule. But when I get in times like this where I kind of want to study stuff, then that's the kind of stuff I'll be studying a lot of, or listening to other people talk about it. I feel like for me it moves too fast because I can hear what they say, but it's like I don't have enough time to really like for it to sink in. So I think they were kind of talking about if somebody's like selling a rental property or something, and like the percentages that they can get, and like I don't really know. Like it was some whole thing where I was like I don't understand fully, but it's like I think the part that I listened to a few days before that kind of talked a little bit about what that Torah portion for that week was about those laws, um, somewhat talking about the um, somewhat talking about um, how do I say this? Um, I don't know. It was just it kind of had some of the information about like oxes destroying other people's stuff or whatever. You know, I don't know. Kind of went more into that, but it's like some of the stuff I'm like, okay, this doesn't apply to me. Like I don't own an ox or like whatever. Like some of it's like, okay, learning for the sake of learning it. But I like to see what other people learn because I'm like, well, where are they coming to these conclusions about these things? And they're learning, the Talmud is a very important set of texts for Jews who learn a lot. And they don't only learn, the Old Testament, like they go more into other learning material that most Christians don't really touch. And I often wonder why. Like, why don't Christians look at it? You know, I mean, it was written after Jesus, and so it's not really something that you would have seen Jesus like talking about the Talmud. Um, I don't know if Jesus quotes the Mishnah. Think, I think I'm reading a book about it, so I think there is some argument that he um quotes a lot of stuff regarding like what Hillel, like a lot of what he teaches comes from like the teachings of Hillel. Um, because some of it does seem a little farther out
from what you see in the actual Old Testament. Like when you read the Old Testament, you're like, okay, like where did Jesus get that from? You know, it seems a little bit like yes, it's there, but it's like it's there because we're taught that it's there. Like where did that come from? Like so, you can tell he's kind of pulling from other ideas sometimes, that are definitely they're backed by the Old Testament, but because that's what was written then. But there's other schools of thought that he was kind of talking about. At least people say that possibly um, he was talking about that. And from what I understand, the Mishnah is the oral Torah that was given at Sinai. So there was a written, all the stuff that you see in, all the Exodus, all the stuff you see in the Torah that was written, not only the Ten Commandments on the tablets, but what was actually written. And then there's the oral Torah that was given, but um, it wasn't written. And that's what people still believe. They still hold to the oral Torah. And then the Talmud is the commentary that's written down about the oral Torah. And so the commentary of multiple different rabbis and religious um, teachers over the ages. Um, I don't know if any of those religious people lived during the time of Jesus. I don't really know the history, but it seems like some of the people that get spoken about lived near the time of Jesus. There's some speculation about if Jesus is mentioned in the Talmud or not, because there's some names that seem similar, or some people that seem like they could be similar, but people argue that the timelines don't really add up. And then people argue that there was, the Christian church censoring it, and so people had to make it change. They had to change it so that the Christian censors wouldn't disallow them to print the Talmud. There was a lot of persecution going on too, so that kind of led to tampering with the actual text, which I have a problem with that too. So it's kind of like, I mean, if the Christian church did it to other religions, I think there were people infiltrating possibly the Christian religion, kind of tampering with those texts too. I think that's not too wide of an assumption. Um, but ultimately, what I like to do is look and use my eyes and use my vision and just kind of like reflection and kind of just see what I'm actually seeing in the world. When people say, oh, this is happening or this is a prophecy or whatever, I'm like, am I actually seeing that? Is that what's actually happening? Or is this person just kind of making up something? One of my friends was explaining to me how Donald Trump is supposedly following after the prophet Jehu, and that's why a lot of Christians think that Donald Trump is like a holy person of some kind that has some kind of spiritual method that he's doing, and they think he's so positive and good. I mean, we're also taught to look at things like the fruits of the spirit, and I'm like, I think this guy has just got evil in him. He's a politician in general, so I don't trust his where he's coming from. I think he's racist. I think he's prejudiced. I think he's full of a lot of hate. But some people see it and they're like, we love him. He's helpful. He's good for us. And I don't see it that way. I think the guy's kind of scary, but I don't know. Some people think that he's like connected to some positive biblical prophecy of somebody who's supposed to help the people. But I'm like, dude, if you can't control yourself on social media, that already says something about you. Like, you can't be both. I don't think somebody can be out of control, just typing all kinds of stuff, but still be like some kind of holy individual. Like, I'm not saying that people have to be perfect. I'm just saying, like, when I use my eyes and ears, I don't really see it. I don't really see it as like him being like helpful towards people and like full of love. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't really see it. I think he's got a lot of issues that might get us all killed, but I don't know. Like, to some extent, you know, sometimes you want a crazy leader when there's a bunch of other crazy leaders out there in the world. You don't want the most passive leader or somebody who can't hardly remember what they're talking about mid sentence all the time. Um, I almost joke when I see those clips of Biden. I almost joke because I'm like, he seems the way that I am when I'm stoned, and I'm just like, I can't even remember what I was saying. Like I'm like mid sentence, and I'm like I don't mean to like laugh at somebody's like medical condition, but I'm just saying like it's almost what it's like. Like if you get stoned and you know like what it's like, sometimes you'll be mid sentence and you'll just be like, I don't even know what I was what I was talking about before this or where I was going. It's like I don't know what the topic was. I veered off onto some tangent and now I'm just talking about something and I was like, I don't even know what the next point was, so I just kind of have to stop talking because it's like I don't even know what I'm saying. Like that's kind of how it seems, you know. And I wish it was just as simple as, oh, he's just a stoner. Like that would be that would be nice to just be like, oh, our president's a stoner. Like that's what's wrong with him. Like that would be kind of funny and like interesting. But I think unfortunately, if it's something more serious, I don't know why they would keep somebody in office that is just not well enough to do that. And it's like it just worries me. I'm like, is nobody else worried about this? Like, am I the only one who's like, maybe you need to go get your medical attention and like stop being the president. But I mean, who am I? I can't control any of this. But it's just like other countries must just be laughing hysterically. It's like we're like a joke over here. It's like we're out there trying to bully the world and we're just like fumbling around. It's like it just doesn't add up. I don't know. I don't really see it, but that's just kind of where I'm going with these things. Like I said, I don't really know what I'm talking about. Like I'm just rambling at this point, but that's kind of what I've been studying, where I'm kind of going into studying, what's of interest to me, what I've kind of been finding I don't know, I get a lot of joy out of just like studying stuff. Then I have some friends that I like to talk to about stuff, like bounce off ideas or like see what they've been learning as well. And we kind of all just like do our own thing and live our own lives and let live and let live, and that's really nice. I'm not really here to like argue with people about stuff, like because you can see like I'm just kind of like going through different topics. I'm like, oh, this is of interest to me. Let me like go through that, and like learn about that. And I think this week's Parsha is Teruma, about offerings. I haven't really read like any of it other than just seeing like what is the Jewish, what are the Jewish days in the month that we're in, kind of what holidays are coming up. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, like, it takes a while to, like, sit and, like, try to learn this stuff. Like, I'm not raised with it. I'm just kind of interested in it, very interested in it. Um, I feel like it's nicer to be interested in than it is to try and be interested in like the news and stuff like that. It's just like that stuff just stresses me out. Like I'd rather study ancient. Let me study some ancient stuff. I like ancient things. Like I don't want to know anything new. Like I don't want to know what's going on, in the modern world. Like none of it appeals to me. It's just drama and tragedy. Like, I mean, so is history, but I mean, I like history. I like to learn about history and question different things when it comes to the religious part of it. Um, so that's kind of what I'm studying lately. You know, trying to protect my energy, not really trying to get too involved with like debating things because I don't really see it helpful. But if it does happen, I try to kind of keep in mind what were those conversations. I do kind of ad, like look into people's perspectives, but sometimes I'm like, it's not for me. That perspective is not for me. Um, and it's fine. It's fine for it to not be for me, but um, I do value what my friends and family have to say. It's not that I don't want to hear anybody say something that I don't agree with, but I just don't want to argue about it. I don't want to get into arguments about it. It's like I feel like I prefer talking to people who are like, this is what I believe. And I can be like, oh, okay, I see it differently. This is kind of what I'm thinking based on what I've been studying. And I know you've been studying that. These other people, that's how you came to that conclusion. And I like to just be able to ask questions and like, not to challenge them, but to like see like, oh, like why did that person mention that and where'd they get that from? And maybe I'd be more interested to look it up versus somebody being like, no, you're wrong. Then it like causes this like shutdown where it's like, well, I don't even want to like consider your opinion because it's not even like I don't like people coming at different opinions um from like an egotistical perspective. I kind of like it more from like I like to learn from people and bounce ideas off people. I don't like to argue. Like arguing for me is not something that I value. Um it's hard to always avoid it 100%, but I don't really like it. It just takes too much energy. And I'm not even saying that I'm in the right. Who knows? Maybe what I don't believe that this other person was saying, maybe they're completely right and I'm completely wrong. Like, that's very possible. Maybe we're both right. Maybe we're both wrong. I don't really know. I don't see it their way, but you know, just because I don't see the world getting better and people saying things like, oh, this certain leader is going to take us and like help us and like be there for us because they're so connected to God. And I'm like, I don't know what you've been saying. I don't really see it. And so it, when I look around, I don't really see a lot of leaders stepping up in politics and actually trying to help people. They're just greedy and trying to take and trying to manipulate and lie and steal and just there's so many lies. I mean, I'm not even going to go into it, but it's like we've seen presidents blatantly lying to us. I mean, look at the war that happened in Iraq. I mean, they blatantly lied and said, oh, they did it. And then they're like, oh, no, wait, they didn't do it. It's like, how can you get away with that? Like, oh, we're just going to go to war with some random country and then just be like, oh, yeah, they didn't have any weapons, but we were just like attacking them even though someone else attacked us or whatever. It's like, really? You've been lying to us for like years about it, but people overlook that. They're like, oh, we trust them. Then they're gonna go vote for him again. It's like, dude, come on. Like, didn't you learn your lesson the first time? But that's the thing. Humans don't learn. Like, we have our perspectives, we have our opinions, and we get very ingrained. They get very ingrained, and we don't change them. You know, I can always see something from my perspective and always find a reason why somebody else isn't right if their perspective isn't pretty similar to mine. We all do that. If you vote one political party, there's a reason why you choose one versus the multiple others because you think they're all wrong. It's like everyone thinks their own religion is right, everyone thinks their own practices are right. I mean, the way I see it is maybe things are right. Some things are right for some of us some of the time. Um, and I like to learn about those things. Like if these people think it's best to eat that, I want to I want to see why. Why are they benefiting off of eating that? If these people think it's best to like pray like this or meditate that way or read these books or study this thing or keep these commandments or do that, I want to know why. Like why are people benefiting from all like why do people find a benefit from it? Like is it just a placebo effect or is there actual like reality to it? And the placebo effect is still reality, but is it just like I believe it's going to work, so it works? Or does it work for anyone who practices it? You know, like the Bible says, if you keep the commandments, then you're going to prosper. It says that near the end of Deuteronomy. Is that true? If someone who, you know, just randomly is like, I'm going to love God and keep the commandments, someone who never did it before, if they just start that, are they going to start seeing like prosperous opportunities that they can take? And what about the people who do keep the commandments that don't prosper? Um, is it because they're not doing it right? It's like, I don't know. But a lot of food for thought for this morning. Um, I didn't really plan out my morning, obviously, but this is what it turned into. So I've got to get into what I need to do next before I got to be somewhere at noon. And I'll see if I can even post this. All right. Thanks for listening to this ramble, and that's it for now.